Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Schurenberg. I'm the CEO of Inc., and I'm really excited to be joined today by David Chang. Now, you know him as the founder of Momofuko and a dozen other restaurants around the world. He's also widely thought of as one of the leading chefs in the restaurant industry today. And more recently, he's the author of a new book, Eat a Peach, which is, I have to say, one of the best entrepreneurial memoirs I've ever read. And believe me, I've read a lot. So, welcome, David. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start at the beginning. Let's go back to your childhood, where you were raised by what are widely regarded as tiger parents. I think you use that word in your book. A father and mother who strove to make you excel at everything you did. What influence did they have on the way you turned out?
I mean, Freud would probably say everything. I mean, I spent a good portion of my formative years trying to tell myself that my parents had nothing to do with who I was. But I think years of therapy have finally made me realize that the entirety of who I am was developed because of how they shaped me, for good and for worse.
What was the good? What was the worse?
You know, I think the good is the idea of family, the idea of hard work, the idea that just the idea that you can improve yourself. And that's something that was not very clear to me as a kid. And I think the most important thing that I learned from them was sacrifice.
Tell me more about that. What sacrifice did they make?
Well, so many immigrants. This country, America, is all immigrants, especially the Asian immigrants that came in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. That was incredibly difficult. And a story that a lot of Americans today don't quite know, just how lonely it was, how isolating, the fact that most people didn't speak the language, including my father. And they came to this country to have a better life, to literally live the American dream. And they worked so hard to provide a better upbringing and to provide choices for their offspring that they couldn't have if, they didn't leave their respective countries. And my parents left a war-ravaged Korea. People think of Korea today as this unbelievable economy, but it wasn't too long ago where it was like a joke in the World Bank. So the sacrifice is something that I learned a lot from them. And the worst is probably the sacrifice as well, right? It's a double-edged sword. Right? To work so hard, to be so single-minded track on something, you forget the humanity in other things, and also the part of cultural differences in America where my dad and mom just didn't know how to relate or talk to kids that were raised in America, and their values just were not copacetic with myself and some of my siblings, and that was very, very difficult. And it's taken me a long time to think about how my dad raised me, and he recently passed, and it's been a very difficult process because I've spent my entire life trying not to be him. And the more I realize I'm a lot like him, then I understand myself. And I think the thing that was bad about it is to be so driven to succeed, to have objective results. There's no time to emote love, no time to sort of have a life that other people may understand, right? And my dad only understood success as tangible things, objective results. So his love was shown through hard work and through financially being successful, and anything else was not love. So the hard part about that ultimately was to grow up in a household that was conditional love. And that's hard. That's something that no kid should ever have to experience. And the whole idea of tiger parenting, made famous by that Yale professor a decade plus ago, is a horrible book. It is it perpetuates the myth of the model minority and the fact that tiger parenting works. And the reality is it does work. It works incredibly well. But what happens for the individuals that don't do well in that system? And more importantly, what are the side effects for the people that succeed under that system? And I just don't think it's a balanced approach.
All right. Well, David, thanks. Yeah. Conditional love. It's something we can come back to later on in this conversation. You said that your father worked so hard in a restaurant so that you would never have to work in a restaurant. And yet, there was a point at which you realized that cooking was what really drove you. What about cooking was so special to you?
Cooking was something that I got into not because there was like some Proustian moment where I had to like go back to my childhood nostalgia and recreate that in food. It just wasn't the case. It was something that I got into because I wasn't supposed to do it. I think I'm attracted to contrarian things, and I got in sort of the tail end of cooking before it became mainstream or popular on TV and social media and whatnot. And a lot of people used to get into cooking, at least in America, because they couldn't do anything else. You know, either they got out of jail or the military and they were unemployable. And ironically, that's how I found myself. I couldn't really get a job in the corporate world that was meaningful to me or I could excel in. I didn't have any technical capabilities to work in, a .com or something like that. I didn't know what I was going to do. My grades were too bad to continue in graduate school in some form. So I was left to do something that I had an inkling to maybe dip my toes in, but I never thought in my wildest dreams it would be a profession. And I got into it because I was following this principle of via negativa, something I learned in college. The early Christian theologians used to, meditate on the idea of what God was. And if God was omniscient, omnipresent, ineffable, you couldn't really understand it, but you could understand what he wasn't. He wasn't, this cup of coffee. It wasn't this pencil. And if you just go over that, you would get closer to knowing what you wanted to do. In a class that I did terribly, and that's my understanding of it, history of Christian thought in the West. And I repurposed that thinking for myself. I was going to decide what I wanted to do by doing a lot of different things, from being a barback to working as a nighttime clerk to, when I think about all the jobs I had, it was a crazy amount. From working at Payne Weber and asset management in Hartford, you name it, I had some kind of job. And I realized that if I was stuck at a desk, I would, even if I was good at this job, I would wind up in the middle. And that was like an existential dread. So I got into cooking, and I remember telling myself, I don't know if this is what I want to do. It seems like a very difficult job that pays nothing. Everyone says you're out of your mind. You are an idiot, Dave. I think that's what some of my friends said. This is career and social suicide to enter the culinary profession. And I think that was appealing to me. And I wanted to find out for myself. I got tired of everyone telling me what to do, that I decided I needed to find out for myself. And I wasn't going to do it for the money. I wanted to do it because it was going to have intrinsic value for me. And that's why I got into cooking. It wasn't a calling per se. It was like a burden I had to sort of carry. And I didn't realize it till a year in when I started cooking professionally that I was allergic to working for so many things. And then when I realized, for the most part, I didn't take a day off for a solid year plus, that's when it dawned on me, maybe this is something that I have to do. And I think the idea that we mythologize that you find your calling or what you want to do, it's all paved with gold and it's clear and it's very lucid. It wasn't for me. And even to this day, it's been a fight, 51% to 49% of how much I hate it, And that to me was the balance. So when I realized that I could get better, that even though I was terrible at cooking initially, what I liked about it, the thing that I have a great reserve of is grit and determination and quite frankly, just stubbornness to just continue doing it. And that is like one of the best skill sets you can have, because cooking is ultimately about repetition, doing something over and over and over again. And at some point, I just embraced doing that, and I got better at it. And, cooking gave me meaning that way.
Dave, I couldn't help but notice in your book that your descriptions of how you started out in cooking and training yourself to be a good cook, and the similarities between that and how you attacked golf. You were a great golfer as a teenager. And the idea of repetition and getting it right and watching yourself and standing in front of the television and chopping food all through the night, reserves of determination that are remarkable. Where did that determination come from? And do you think that you would be the success you are today if you didn't have that?
Absolutely not. There's no way. The tortoise wins the race, and I'm slower than the tortoise. The only thing that I have, and what I saw in cooking, as clear as day, which can sort of be seen as a microcosm of culture at large, is there are many different avenues to success. Success is making something that people eat and find delicious, innovative, has value. There's more than one way to get there. And at least in cooking, like in golf, there's a lot of different ways to shoot a low score, right? You could have great iron play. You could hit the ball really long. You could be a great short game player, but you could have an ugly swing, a beautiful swing. It doesn't matter. All that matters is consistency. And cooking for me was not something that came naturally to me. It just didn't. I mean, my first partner in culinary school quit rather than continue to be my partner in level 2. And no one, when I first started out, would ever have said, "Oh, this person, let's earmark him for success." I certainly wouldn't. And that's not, me being modest. This is the truth. Most things I don't have the aptitude for to start out. But that doesn't mean I can't develop skills or I'm a late bloomer. And I would probably say I developed much later in most things. And cooking for me was an ability to see that there are people more talented than me. But I had this undeniable belief that I could outwork them. At some point, someone will quit before I quit. And that's it. I don't know if that's talent. Talking with my psychiatrist over the years, it seems to me it's more just stubborn stupidity. But that was the only thing I had is I'm not trying to build a rocket for SpaceX. This is one of the lowest levels of that anybody can do for skill, is just chop something. And that's just how I looked at it, is I'm going to do this. I'm going to work harder at this. I'm going to be honest, and I'm just going to pour myself into this. Absolutely throw myself into this profession. And nobody will ever tell me that I didn't work hard enough. Nobody will ever tell me that the things that I could control, right? I could walk through life without wearing contacts and eyeglasses. I can control that by correcting my vision. And it's the same way in cooking. I could correct my deficiencies through hard work. And that was so clear, because I can see tangible evidence every day of me getting better knife skills, me making a dish more proficiently, so on and so forth. So that's what really propelled me. And I don't think that I would be successful without it, for sure. And I think somewhere along the way, from all the trauma that I experienced as a kid, I feel that this is like something that we all have to experience. You have post-traumatic growth or post-traumatic stress disorder. And I just decided I was not going to use the failures of my past as an excuse moving forward. And I have no problem, nor do I blame anybody to have PTSD. That is a completely logical and reasonable response to the difficulties in life. I just reached a point where I wasn't going to feel sorry for myself anymore.
That's fantastic. And so maybe it's not a talent, as you say, but it certainly is a superpower. I have to congratulate you for that. One of the courageous topics that you raise in the book is you're quite honest about your struggle with bipolar disorder. This is not uncommon among entrepreneurs and founders. Paul English, for example, founder of Kayak, talks about that in his book, Truckful of Money. But it played a role in your life. Tell us about that. And I was struck too by there was a footnote in your book that says, if you're looking for the key to my success, look at my depression. You're looking right at it. Depression and my choice to resist it were the keys to success. Tell us about that.
Well, that stubbornness in myself that I was talking about was exactly what I think was the catalyst for my success as well, in not just the professional world, but life itself for many reasons. And as I mentioned, that I think I was a late bloomer in life. I didn't understand why things didn't come easy for me. And it's clear that I was suffering from depression from, sophomore year of high school. And I've had more moments of very, very deep lows than the manic highs. And I was able to sort of self-prescribe with alcohol, drugs, and partying, and just sort of running away. Fleeing problems is something I'm very good at. And in my youth, I would just avoid dealing with how I felt, because I was taught that's weakness. You don't talk about your feelings, especially in my upbringing with a father that was born and raised in North Korea and lived through the Korean War. You don't say, "Dad, I don't feel good." That just doesn't happen. That is unfortunately the culture that I grew up in. So I reached a point where, when I talked about having an existential crisis, I really had that both professionally and mentally, because I reached a point where what was the meaning of anything? Everything was meaningless to me. And I read a lot, but in college I never read the books that I had to read. And I was certainly enamored with existential philosophy, and I didn't quite understand all the things that Camus or Nietzsche would say, but I found myself, again, now it makes a lot more sense to me. And I was trying to find meaning in a world that would never provide meaning to me. So, of course, that just added to and compounded my depression that I had physically. I have a chemical imbalance. And there were some incredibly low periods that I didn't know why until I think I was like 26. And when you start thinking things through in a very binary fashion, it's an either or proposition. Well, everything I've done is a failure. No one has ever expected me to be successful. I have never lived up to my potential. Everyone has told me I'm stupid, I'm slow. That's not in my mind. That's literally the truth. I've wasted and squandered all these opportunities provided to me. I don't fit in. A lot of this might have been true or in my mind. And you start asking yourself, what's the point? And I got to a place where it's either I kill myself or I do something else. And it's always a situation I still to this day try to create every decision as a spectrum of scenarios, and I try to define the outliers so I don't have to waste my time thinking about the middle. And it's either you harm oneself and end it all, or you don't, right? And so once I got the floor and I saw, well, that's always an option. And if you really meditate on that, it's not so different at all. And if people haven't had this in your life, it's something that I think anyone can relate to. When you meet someone that's diagnosed with a terminal illness or stage 4 cancer, and all of a sudden they want to live their life. And that's not exactly how I felt, obviously, but once I understood and explored what the worst case scenario was for myself, then all these other doors became available to me, because you get to a point of who cares? Who cares? Everything I thought I couldn't do, now who cares? I remember being like, if I had to declare bankruptcy personally, who cares? If I have to be homeless the rest of my life, who cares? I've already sort of settled on what the worst case is, and that's ultimately going to happen to someone at any point in their life. You just don't know it. And death became a catalyst for me to sort of come out of my shell. And I think there were a lot of things I had in my mind about how I wanted to live and what I wanted to do, but I was just too afraid to try it out. And me tackling my depression around really in earnest in late 2003, early 2004, gave me the platform in conjunction with my psychiatrist to see what therapy was like in life, right? Not in the office with my doctor, but to explore if I could live life on my terms without amends and without appeal, I should say, and try things out. And I just was like, okay, I'm going to open a restaurant. I had no real experience. I had been cooking like 4.5 years, but that's just like not enough, right? And I didn't know any better. I didn't know anything. And I was so full of blissful ignorance that everything seemed possible. And what I discovered was work became my therapy, because the harder I worked, I had a tangible physical goal that didn't involve me feeling sorry about myself. And Momofuku is intertwined with my mental health, because there's so many moments where I don't think I would have made, like how we operated the first year or two, nobody had ever seen anything like that before. Well, the good reason is, like, our decisions range from, I think, borderline obnoxious, offensive, to damn near genius level stuff, and everything in between. The only reason those doors were available to us is not because people didn't think about them before, it's because you couldn't do it because it wasn't socially acceptable. Well, if you're thinking about dying all the time, who cares? So, it's so hard for me to parse out my struggles with mental health with the success and failures of Momofuku, because they're one and the same to me.
That's great. Thank you for that. What you said just a few minutes ago about how you never should have succeeded, that you didn't know what you were doing, it's a very familiar entrepreneurial theme. A lot of successful entrepreneurs say, if I knew then what I know now, I would have known that I never could have done what I actually did.
Yeah.
And that was the case with you. Let's go back to that moment when you decided to start Momofuku. There was a realization that you had that there was an open space in the dining world, that up to that point, fine dining meant French restaurants and white tablecloths and unaffordability for most people. And you realized that it didn't have to be that way. Could you elaborate on that thinking?
I traveled the world. I lived a lot of different places, and it didn't dawn on me till I started traveling more specifically in Asia and living and working in Asia, that everybody wanted to eat well. And if in the 90s, early aughts, you have to sort of suspend belief, especially if you're under the age of 35. How could a culture not care about food? Well, that was not too long ago, 20 years ago. No one really cared about eating well. That sounds crazy, but it wasn't part of the cultural conversation. It wasn't part of the zeitgeist. It was seen, if we went out to dinner, it would be a steakhouse. Or if you wanted to go to a nice restaurant that had, a nice wine list, and you asked your friends, more often than not, the response would be no, or like, that's weird. Why would you want to do that? Unless you had opulent wealth or a lot of disposable income, it just was a frivolous thing. Or it was seen as once or twice a year for special occasions. So eating well at an affordable level didn't really exist. It existed in pockets in sort of, immigrant communities, but it wasn't accessible. And when I lived in Asia, it dawned on me, oh my God, eating well happens at every price point. From the convenience store, if you go to Japan, and this is how I define how well a food culture is if the food in a convenience store is amazing, rest assured that you're going to eat well just about every meal in that country. And all the way up and everything in between. It's harder to find a bad meal in Japan than it is, it's so hard to find a bad meal. And I was living there with no money, yet I was eating extremely well. And I thought to myself, there's no way I could do this in America. There's absolutely no way I could eat this well in America unless I was eating fast food all the time. And that's when I realized there was a giant gaping hole. And, I'm a big fan of music and culture, and I've seen these movements happen where, this dialectic of the underground becoming mainstream has happened since like the dawn of man or the advent of culture. And you could see that in any way, especially in literature, especially in music, especially in art. And I was like, well, I think that people are going to want to eat well. And at that time, people did eat well. They cared about pizza, they cared about barbecue, they cared about hamburgers. And I was like, if you extrapolate that care and that love and that fandom for it, like, why couldn't that be for everything else? And when I lived in Japan, I would see, and I was like, the timing, I'm so lucky on timing. It was really the great boom of ramen in Japan. Again, it was always something big, but it wasn't like what it was then. And you would have lines of 2 to 3 hours, sometimes 5 hours for certain ramen shops. And it was the same kind of fervor that I saw for American barbecue and pizza, but like times 10. And I'm like, you eat a bowl of ramen and then you think, oh, wait, Americans don't know what this is. They think that ramen is a cup of noodles and that's 25 cents and it's a dorm food. But what I was eating was like night and day. And it dawned on me, I was like, wow, Americans think they're drinking orange juice, but they're drinking frozen concentrate. They have no idea what it is. This is like the best, most beautiful, most delicious fresh squeezed orange juice. And I was like, of course people are going to like this. And that's when it really dawned on me. I was like, wait, it didn't have to be ramen. It could be anything else. And I was just trying to find the patterns that were similar. And I was like, wait, if people care about this so ravenously in Japan, they'll care about it here. And it didn't have to just be ramen. It was anything else. And that's when I started to see very clearly, even when I go to China, you could eat so well for like $1 in Beijing. And it's like, what's preventing this from happening in America? And that was my big bet, is that this market was missing. And we tried to do something different. And I don't know if we're the first, but again, I didn't know how to make any other food other than fancy, high-end dining. And I didn't like the price point. And my last job was working at Cafe Balut, an Upper East Side restaurant. And the reason why a lot of cooks worked there wasn't because it was the food they wanted to eat. It was the food that it was the restaurant they worked at because it's how they could learn the best technique and work with the best ingredients. And my idea was, yes, it's a noodle bar, but that was just a vehicle to do this, to sell food at an affordable price point using the very best ingredients. And I wanted something in the $20 price point. Something that you could go 1 or 2 times a week if you lived in the neighborhood. And that was my whole idea. Was I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and it could have been any food. I just knew that there was a void in how people ate, and I wanted to fill that.
Now, you've said that in the years since that cooking has become glamorized beyond all recognition, and that you would think twice about going into the industry today. Tell us about how things have changed and what's wrong with that.
The culinary industry has, I think, been finally exposed to have the faulty foundation that it's always had. We were woefully underprepared, as the entire country was, for the pandemic and quarantine. But I think it's really just shown that we don't pay well enough. Food, the real solution is food just needs to be more expensive. People need to pay more if we're going to provide benefits for our employees. We need to get rid of tipping. We need to be more equitable across the board. But I mean, it was clear over the beginning of 10 years ago, 2000, sort of 11-ish, that I know in our group, we were beginning to have more and more meetings about how impossible it was to be profitable, or we were profitable. We saw the projection was going to get more and more difficult. Everything was getting more expensive except for food and how we could charge it. And effectively, a bubble was being created, and it was a food restaurant bubble. And I this is a metaphorical car that was broken, and we always did some temporary fix on the car. If it was the independent restaurant group was going to be this metaphorical car, and now we have an opportunity to actually fix it properly. And I hope that's what we do. And the industry needs to figure out a lot of things, and we can't go back to what February 2020 was. And that's my big gripe right now is that's the easy, but it's a difficult but easier difficult decision to do. Of course we want to go back, but the question we have to be asking ourselves is, it didn't really work that well to begin with. I mean, if you wanted to get a loan to operate a restaurant, like a dine-in restaurant, no bank would give that to you. Even if you were a successful operator, that just tells you how, pitiful the economics were. And that is one of the difficulties for, I think, the government to figure out legislation for aid. Why would they want to save something that was broken to begin with? And I don't have those answers, but I do think we need to start to fix these underlying issues in the restaurant industry, from labor to benefits to representation to pay, because we cannot leave ourselves to be vulnerable and fragile in some other kind of difficult situation. I mean, there probably will be another pandemic or an environmental disaster, and we need to be better prepared. And I think ultimately we were not doing enough to question the status quo collectively and to be prepared for the worst case scenario, hoping that we were wrong.
Paint a picture for me, if you will, of what the industry would look like in, say, 5 years if the industry did seriously address the issues that you just raised.
We need for people to see that restaurants are not just restaurants; they're cultural banks, and they're important to the communities. And I don't remember the statistic, but it's something like 90 to 95% of all cash flow generated by a restaurant literally goes out to other vendors. So we are a bank, but we just don't charge interest, and that's on the actual cash front. But I think what is more significant, right, other than propping up your florist, your accountants, the garbage disposal, the plumber, like restaurants just continue to pay for services, is how important they are to the community and to the people that get jobs. It is still no different for immigrants coming into this country than when my dad came in 1963. It's a job that you can get to sort of moor yourself in this country without having technical expertise or something like that. And I hope that we're able to create an industry that gives people a living wage where they can continue to have the opportunities that my father had, but better. I mean, I don't know why we want to make it worse. And we need to pay people more. It's simple as that. We need to hopefully have, healthcare for employees. The fact that we have an entire labor force out there in this pandemic, oftentimes people asking themselves, like, what if I get sick? That's just unacceptable. All right. And we have our neighbors in Canada, we have Australia, we have places where that's where I think we need to go. Without going to the politics of it all, we need to have a future where we're looking for the employees first versus the restaurant.
By your own admission, you were not a great leader when you started out running restaurants, and you attribute a lot of your turnaround to your mentor, the great executive coach, Marshall Goldsmith. What did you learn from him, and how has it changed how you lead?
I am so thankful for Marshall, someone you know as well. Because I initially only saw him because Dr. Jim Kim made me see him. I was at an incredibly low point in my life. And the way I describe it, what Marshall did to me, or it made me understand, was I was the kid that would tell everybody else that they smelled bad. Marshall made me realize that I was the smelly kid.
I haven't heard that metaphor before.
And I was the kind of kid that would make people feel bad, like, hey, but that realization that I was the fault, that I was the catalyst, that was a lot to handle.
How did it change how you ran your company?
Well, that's the thing is I've been working with Marshall, I don't know, 8 years.
Uh-huh.
It takes time for what he's talking about to become actionable because what he tells you is not something you don't know already, and almost everything he tells you, you already know. But that was the second thing I had to learn. Just because I know it and I think it doesn't mean I do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest difference was finding ways to make that actionable. And, I might paraphrase the great Alan Mulally because something that he said and did in one of the meetings I had was like his goal at Ford wasn't really to make decisions. His goal was to put other people to make decisions. And his job was to help them make the best decision. And that's really what I tried to do was to realize that, every time I try to make a decision, I almost always inevitably screw it up. And I only screwed it up because how I used to make decisions was very successful and very effective, but I didn't grow and I didn't change and I didn't mature. And those same things that caused me to be successful were beginning to be the detriment and the downfall of myself and my company. So it was a slow process of delegating responsibilities. And I think it just took time and maturity to realize just because I know the answer doesn't mean I need to share it with everybody. Because quite frankly, I could be wrong.
It is one of the great challenges of growing a company is learning to delegate, let other people run your baby, and realizing that what got you this far will not get you to the next step. I think that Eat a Peach, as I said at the opening of this, is one of the great entrepreneurial memoirs that I've ever read. What does the title mean? What were you trying to accomplish with the book?
Well, it's in reference, obviously, to Momofuku. Momofuku means lucky peach. These are a lot of things I don't normally talk about because you can see them as this sort of pseudo-intellectual that's full of themselves. So I'm sort of reluctant to explain all of it, but here I go.
Good.
Eat a Peach, the logo of Eat a Peach originally for Momofuku was because I was a big Allman Brothers fan, and Eat a Peach, their second album, was amazing while Duane Allman was alive. And I mean, being a big fan of Duane Allman, he even referenced T.S. Eliot's poem, the love song of Prufrock, and in it, the character who is in a midlife crisis, reviewing the events of his life, questioning, did I actually do what I needed to do? Did I have, how many regrets do I have? And it wasn't necessarily unsuccessful, but he was just middle-aged, living a life of mediocrity. And there's a line where it says, do I dare to eat a peach? And I just, for the book of what this book was about, of me reflecting without really having answers or to give any prescriptive advice, I thought it was appropriate. And it just made a lot of sense. And the cover is obviously a reference to the myth of Sisyphus, made more famous by Camus' essay on the idea of suicide and living a life that has meaning in a world of no meaning, and how cooking to me is the dumbest job you could possibly have. It is, if you had to choose a profession that most embodied the existential, absurdity, it's cooking. You're going to spend all this time making something, whether it's fast food or something extremely beautiful and expensive, only to see it flush down the toilet a few hours later. And it's so impermanent. It's so stupid. It's hard to scale. Yet, as I say, it's 99% the dumbest job in the world, but that 1% is the addiction. That 1% is what makes it worthy for me to call like a calling, and it's something that I'm constantly chasing after, and that's again problematic as well as good. And that was the name of Vita Peach. It was a lot of different things, but I thought it was the most appropriate thing to say that this is a hidden way to talk about the book.
Fantastic. Thank you for explaining that. That's really great. This is a moment in American history where there is a racial reckoning going on, for sure. You talk about your upbringing and being Korean in an industry that lionized French cuisine, say, and that you could never imagine someone who looked like you cooking for Belout, for example. Tell me about that, how that has changed for you, how that affected your life, and is the environment different now?
Well, if I had to sort of connect the dots in almost every project I've ever done, there's a lot of different reasons, whether any restaurant or anything we launched. I think one of the core values that we internally ask, or to myself, and sometimes I don't even share it with everybody in my own team, was over the years, it has to check the box of, is it challenging the status quo of how identity, whether it be Asian American or any other culture's identity, and challenge the assumption and the perception of that. And for me, starting out, I never once said that we were making noodles or Asian American food. I always said we were making American food because I never wanted to be typecast. And I wanted to redefine what it meant to be Asian American, not just to white America, but also to Asian America. And every step of the way, it was an exploration of what was possible. That goes all the way from how it was described to on the menu to what we were serving and how we were serving it. It was a very subversive and continues to be a very subversive way of commenting on racism in America. And I think we've been very successful at it. And it doesn't even have to be stuff that is in our restaurant. You know, one of the things that one of the topics and the burdens that I picked up that I wanted to champion was monosodium glutamate, MSG. And if you just look at that, MSG's the anti-MSG sentiment is 100% racist. And if you can understand racism in food, and if we can be that ignorant to food, imagine how terrible it's going to be for other parts of the culture that are harder to understand. And without going too deep in the history of MSG, it's just clear that it's not based on anything factual. Yes, you can have sensitivity to it, and we need to do more testing on it. But to say that it's Chinese restaurant syndrome, to say that Asian foods, all of these things that give you potentially sickness and headaches and nausea, it's all a lie, and it's all marketing. You know, Ajinomoto, that makes most MSG in America, also sells Accent. Accent is MSG, just as a name for white America. Most MSG is consumed in junk food. It just is. No one ever says they're getting headaches. All the Popeyes chicken sandwich, Chick-fil-A, you know why it tastes good? MSG. No one ever says they get Chinese restaurant syndrome from that. And like, that's just, again, an easy understanding of how food and racism is so prevalent and insidious. And I'm totally okay with scrutinizing MSG. Just make it equitable and scrutinize everything else too. That's fine. Just don't pick on something and typecast it as something that isn't good for you because of a Chinese restaurant syndrome. That makes me so mad. And you can see that if you understand that paradigm, you can, again, extrapolate that to so many other things in food, to the kinds of foods that get reviewed in magazines and newspapers, the kinds of cookbooks that get published, the kinds of chefs that get recognition. You know, I always joke, if I was a French chef, a white French chef, and I started to use soy sauce in my French technique or, lemongrass, it would be phrased as high-end French technique with Asian accents. Now, if I was a chef from, say, the Yunnan province in China, and I had worked in the finest French kitchens, 3 Michelin star this, 3 Michelin star that, and I opened a restaurant where I was using, Burgundy wines and thyme and charcuterie with the foods of Yunnan, it would be categorized as fusion.
Mm-hmm.
That should tell you everything. And I want to challenge these assumptions that we have that everything copacetic, because it's not. It's not equitable.
Yeah. David, I'm sorry to say we're out of time now. This could have gone on forever. This was fabulous. And I thank you very much for the frankness with which you've addressed these topics and for the work you've done on racial equity and changing the status quo in so many different ways. I can guarantee you that out of the entire Inc. 5000 Vision Conference, this is the only conversation that will cover the myth of Sisyphus, Camus, Proust, T.S. Eliot, and MSG. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.